Hey, folks. Welcome to the Meta Podcast. This is the integral stage sub-series where we podcast podcasters, host hosts, and probe the people who are trying to bring forward higher, deeper, and more meaningful memes and conversations through online media. Here to help us understand the mutant overflow of Taoist animism, the necessity of memetic erotics, and the somatic anchoring of our weird meta-modern integral intercommunities is the host, and sometimes the only guest of Tea with Tada Hozumi. Hi, Tada.
Hi. I would just preclude that I'm a learning animist. I think is like my appropriate title.
Okay, learning animist, official learning animist.
Well, it's interesting because I'm culturally animist. I'm Japanese, so there's an interesting thing there that Japan's one of the very few places in the world that have never been fully colonized by the Western power, and also has it's an interesting place because in terms of animism, it's there's both imperial animism, so that's like the Japanese imperial throne and the sun goddess and that lineage, and then there's the folk animist traditions, and they kind of blend into each other, literally geographically, and that's kind of like the makeup of the Japanese people because we're kind of a mixed race people of indigenous, kind of like probably Polynesian looking people.
Yeah.
And then people from the mainland, so what's called China and Korea now. So those are the people that were in our mythologies came from heaven. Teng, so heaven.
Sure.
So heaven is the sun goddess descendant. So that's actually the legacy of imperialism is how it's held in Japan. And then there's the local animist gods that are kuni, so that's land or country. And the Japanese animism is kind of like a fusion of kind of both parties. So culturally, it's interesting because Asia is actually a very unique geo-region in that animism and empire have survived together, which is actually very unusual. Because if you go to, let's say, so-called South America, so-called North America, so Turtle Island, and even in Europe, like what's called Africa, like all these places where imperialism and animism, folk animism have collided, they usually one seeds the other. But Asia is very unique in that animism itself has survived with an imperial system and kind of blending in with it and meshing with it. So that's a unique kind of trajectory, and that means also I come from a very culturally animistic background, and then also the when you get into things maybe that more like a long-time collaborator of mine, Dare Sohei, talks about a kind of like proto-religion animism, and that I would say a learning animist. So there's like because I'm not an initiated person, if that makes sense.
Yeah. You're making me think of, I lived in Osaka for a little while.
Okay.
And one of the things I remember was I would talk to a lot of people and they'd say, "Where are you from?" And I would say Canada. And this was particularly true of men. They would go, "Oh, Canada. I like nature." And at first I thought that's just their stereotype of Canada. But after a while I thought, oh, these people are really rooted in an ecological, spiritual sensibility.
Yeah, I mean it's probably both. It's probably both. Probably both. But I mean, Japanese people love the red leaf, the turning of the season. And they love natural tourism, and that's one of the things that's different. If you were in Osaka, you might realize that. And if you travel the countryside, so-called nature is very widely inhabited in Japan. Yeah. So you have shrines and sites like that within the mountains, right? So this is like the difference between kind of like a Turtle Island take on nature, where they're like obviously the indigenous population is decimated, so the names and the sites are not remembered,
right?
So they're kind of kept in this kind of wilderness is seen as something that humans don't touch, whereas actually within Japanese culture and most animist cultures, it's completely different. Like the wild is something you interact with, except that there's like a threshold that you have to cross to gain access. So if you've ever watched Princess Mononoke, that's like the story of Japan of like they have the forest of the gods, and for humans to enter, there is a kind of like a little bit of a tension. And usually the wild is considered female, and the human is considered male, and this is like a lot more energetic than this gets into things, but like I guess we're jumping in. So like my ancestors would have held like ancient sex rites in the mountains or in the forests at the edges of where human and wild meet. And then my understanding is that man or men, like masculine people, will take on the role of the human, and the woman or female, whatever, like however you want to, like describe those things, would take on the role of the wild and have sex or fuck to mediate that threshold. So that's actually kind of like the old tradition of Japanese animism, and the temple shrine sites and stuff are kind of erected as like places where people fuck, basically. And it got less and less about that, and it got less and less obvious. But like, even when you go to shrine in Japan, you can tell if it's male or female. There's male or female deities, and you can tell by how the shrine is erected and stuff what the gender of the spirit is that's enshrined there. Yeah, and I think that's these are all like really important things, and it probably pertains to some of the questions we might get into and stuff.
Yeah, if we ever get there, because all the stuff along the way is fascinating too. Like my sense of the role of a shaman, like whether it's in a traditional village or in the planetary village, is that somebody who is mediating at that threshold between the human and nature in a way to co-create the form of naturalness that we're into. And certainly my own practice involves a lot of just locating and being at certain points in nature, or even, improvisational, sometimes erotic rites and things like that. It really feels like, and I've got no
what does that mean?
justification.
You said improvisational erotics, right? Basically sounds like masturbating, right? Creative masturbation or artistic masturbation.
Well, yeah.
I mean, you outed yourself. That's not me.
There's usually another person involved.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, even if another person's involved.
Story.
Well, it depends on how we look at relationship and humanness, and whether when we are with the person, are we still masturbating? Probably.
Yeah.
When we were masturbating, are we still having sex with somebody else? Yes. So there you go.
You know what strikes me about those things, though, is I often feel in that moment that I'm doing acupuncture for the planet.
Okay.
I got no objective justification for that, but that's the subjective conviction that overtakes me in those moments.
Interesting. So tell me a little bit about that. What's that all about? Acupuncture on the planet. Because do you know Ryan Nakade?
Yeah.
He talks about acupuncture on cultures. So this is kind of similar. And that's like an orientation that I have too, like the whatever was called cultural somatics or whatever. That groups, there's like collective nervous systems that we ping, and you can. I don't do acupuncture, but yeah.
I sort of grew up around a lot of people doing acupuncture, and I've got a sense of the possibility of a better relationship between the noosphere and the biosphere in a way that's a little bit similar to a better relationship between yourself and your whole organism that you get through acupuncture or analogous practices.
Mm-hmm.
And they seem to involve contact spots of a certain kind that you subtly detect, and then you hold at those contact spots, and you allow conductivity to move through there until those things release their tension and temporarily merge with each other to create the thing that we hope the future will be.
All right. I mean, I guess like an acupuncture needle is a very simple act of penetration, so that's something.
Yeah, it's an intriguing. Okay, I don't want to get too far down the acupuncture. What did I want?
Oh no, I think I said penetration, so we can definitely
we can go anywhere with penetration.
We can go towards penetration.
Part of any metaphor.
Yeah, penetration, and it's kind of shitty in English. I feel like we don't actually have a good polar opposite of penetration. It's sometimes called penetrating and devouring, but it's still like not. It's not. It's like puncturing, devouring makes sense, but penetration doesn't really have a great.
No, we're not as clear on the active part of receiving. I think this is a problem in our perception as well, like taking in subtle energy or taking in impressions of the world. We sort of like, well, it's doing something and I'm just here. But you're like, there has to be, you have to really receive an impression in order to turn it into understanding. It has to be active receiving somehow.
Yeah, active receiving. I mean, yeah. I mean, I'm mostly straight, so this is also like, yeah, where it gets into like, yeah, I can say my own stuff. Like, I can even talk about, yeah, my podcast is a form of mimetic penetration I'm always doing. I had a hang out with somebody yesterday and I was talking. They were kind of like, I might unfollow you on Facebook because it's so annoying following you. Something like that. And I was like, yeah, I'm like penetrating the internet all the time.
Yeah.
The act of receiving back, what I receive back, is actually harder for me to not. And that might be my gender socialization too.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I was getting to. Is like, do we have a good opposite of penetration? And yeah, active receiving is something that, yeah. I mean, I think it also pertains to masculinity as well. Not being maybe as part of our matrices as much.
Yeah.
Because receiving, there's a lot of, we have a lot of cultural stuff around active receiving, because it's like, and this gets into like, yeah, memetics and erotics and all this. It's all in the mix.
It's definitely, I'm pretty straight as well, and that it's an effort to receive. Right, whether it's a perception or even if somebody like, I'm not very good with compliments, I have to like make myself stand there and receive a compliment, or I can tolerate a little bit of a sodomy like penetration from but not very much. Right, there's like
like you mean as with a compliment?
A compliment? No, like very similar. I mean, they're all kind of the same to me.
Oh, I think you meant like, do you mean like literal anal penetration?
Yeah, like a little bit, like if a girl's touching me there, I'm like, I have to make myself do it, right? And it's the same with a compliment, and it's the same with a lot of incoming things for me. Is I have to make myself receive. It doesn't spontaneously happen.
Okay. Well, what's interesting? Okay, like I don't know. I'm just like whatever. So like, I actually had to run to the washroom to take care of my hemorrhoids before I got on.
Okay.
So this is like, this is all part of the matrices. I've never been like anally penetrated by like a strap on or anything like that. But they, like the pelvic bowl and hemorrhoids and receiving, this is all like I think I've been working with in my body. And something interesting lately, I've been really trying to. So one of the things that I work with a lot is called hara. Do you know the word hara? It means belly in Japanese. Yeah, it's been a big part of my practice, and for a long time I've been wondering like hara is awesome. Like, like if people don't know what that is and don't use it, they're pretty much like useless human beings to me. I'll just be real. Very, very important. Like it's like half of your body is missing, right? So like. And when I say useless, I don't mean like a utilitarian or materialistic way, but really important for a foundational being. And Japan has a really great history of preserving that knowledge. Profound, actually. It has a lot to do with probably our relationship to death, time, and things like that. It holds all that. Animism, it holds all that. Hara is like that. But then I was wondering, like, why is Japanese society so fucked up then at the same time?
Yeah.
And something that I clicked the other day was, I don't know why. I was talking to this. I was listening to Dare, Sohei, and Sophie Strand's latest podcast together. And they were just talking about masculinity and stuff, and I was like, and for whatever reason, while I was watching, I got a sense of like, wait, okay, so what this hara thing, what's missing in my culture? Because it's such an awesome teaching, but then why are things get so fucked up? And one of the things that really came to me was that actually, when we talk about cultivating our, hara or lower dantian, there is gender qualities as well. And I think a lot of our culture really skews our hara cultivation over to masculinity. So there's a lot of containment and a lot of discipline, which is important. It's the containment and discipline. It creates sharp lines in it. I don't know how to describe this, but you you get a sense of orientation that's very sharp, if that makes sense. Like if you look at the martial arts, you see a sharpness through your dantian. It's like an arrow pointing in different directions. It's like coming to get you, but it's not. And the polar opposite of that would be like Africanist dance, where it's very round, the shapes that your hips go through. Because martial arts is very straight. It's like straight or like parallel or something. But in the Africanist dances, you have a lot more wild, unpredictable, improvised movement of the dantian, which is a different quality. And I think that's really interesting to look at, and how like when we practice internal alchemy, there's like an importance of actually kind of moving through both gender qualities. And I used to identify myself as a non-binary person, but so people can understand gender in a interesting, creative way, and I do. But for this purpose, like talking about it very simply, like you can go through both polarities. And one of the things I've been doing is, as I shift a little bit more, like how I work, I realize that I need to be penetrated more by information. I'm a penetrator generally. People come towards me because I penetrate them informationally, and then I've noticed a few things happen in my life which I feel like were signs a little bit maybe I need to kind of shift that. I don't know how else to describe it, but I don't know. I've been part of a huge canceling campaign against me, and I think part of the triggers that are running it are people are like,
tell us a little bit about that. What, like, I've heard you mention that on a couple of shows.
Oh yeah, I want to jump to that.
What was that, and is that in any sense related to your podcast?
Yeah, actually, very much so.
Yeah, give us a bit of story there.
I mean, like the oh my god, the crazy, like, wow! I just released a podcast yesterday about that, but like, if people really want to get the details, they can go to my website and see the statements I made. You know what I mean, or listen to the podcast, right? But I think what I would say is I really realizing ideological communities have deep cult dynamics centered around ideas, and I was the person, and still am a person inside of that community, going, hey guys, this is a cult. Is this a cult? This is how you, like, I've been doing that for 4 years, and I think what I would say is there's repercussions to that. And like, for example, a good example is like, and this gets into the talk about memetics, right? There's been this whole meme of like believing survivors that went onto the world since like the Me Too stuff, right? And that meme has really taken over ideological communities in this very intense way. But the meme itself that spread is kind of like the crack cocaine version of that meme, if that makes sense. It's very intense, very simple. If you hear something about somebody, you must believe it, and that's like the premise of all your behaviors after. And like, as a lived reality, I just saw that was fucked up, first of all, because what happened was a lot of people there were like really key articles written by people who wrote for like Everyday Feminism, for example, which totally had like this kind of like, I literally read their kind of copy on how to write articles for them. They're like lifting, like those listicles, like proven internet viral formulas. They actually said they literally do that. And they were apparently using that format to try to disseminate information. But I'm like, whoa, even at the time I was like, whoa, okay. Like, so you guys are saying you're using the enemy's weapon, but it's kind of like a little bit weird. Like, it's like, it's baked into the communication style, right? The issues sometimes, right? So, like, for example, there's something like some of the psychoeducation that went out are things like, yes, that are very true. So like, if a person goes through a sexual assault, they might not remember all the details, right? Because trauma acts in a way that makes things cloudy and stuff like that. Sure. The other side is trauma implants false memories. It creates projections of triggers. It basically does a whole bunch of other stuff too that goes the other direction. Like, you know what I mean? Like, people don't know where they are. They make up weird places they were on the day the World Trade Center got like whatever, like demolished. Right. And like 9/11, people don't know where they were that day, but they remember they have you know what I mean? There's like information scatter that happens with trauma, any high stress event. And there was a certain way in which the memes shaped that psychoeducation within my community. So it became the situation that a whole generation of so-called therapists and advocates and experts got psychoeducated in a completely insufficient way. Completely, really ridiculous. You think about it, absolutely like bonkers. Because if you think about it, like it's trauma 101 that people project stuff. It's also personality disorder 101 that people lie. So if you create a cultural condition when projections and lies can fly ad hominem, and people have a lot of understandably like built up trauma around something, it's a free for all. So the meme itself has created this cultural condition. That's just one example. That's really nasty. And as you can imagine, talking about that puts a huge target on your back. Right. If that makes sense.
Like, I'm going to kind of relate to this a little bit from the integral perspective, which is we see a ton of stuff like that, right? We got like a grab bag of the things you shouldn't exclude if you want to have a sensible view of reality. Mm-hmm. So we're always looking at, okay, there's development, but there's development in other dimensions. So you get a group and they've got a supposedly very high ideals. Great. But how are they emotionally? How are they socially? It might be at a very low level where those like super simple crack memes are passing around. And then the other part is, and I think this is one of the more difficult things to get initially about the, metamodernism, integral, all the kind of, hey, we got stages, communities, is that those are stages of style, not content, is how I phrase it, right?
What do you mean?
Like you can talk about stuff that's progressive and postmodern, but that doesn't mean you're talking about it from a progressive postmodern level in yourself. You could be talking at it from a dogmatic team membership perspective, or
right, sure,
right. So the levels are of how we treat whatever we're talking about. They're not levels of what we're talking about. So you get a group together and they're talking very progressive, but they're acting like they're medieval fanatics. And you're like, okay, you're not at the level of what you're discussing. You're at the level of how you discuss it.
And I think I would like I usually embed that in a somatic character. So if the upper dantian and the lower dantian are just like in disharmony. Sure. So you have a lot of people, they talk about restorative justice and it's coming out of their mouth, but it's not in their behavior. It's not in their lower dantian. It hasn't actually sunk. And there's a whole lot of whack of stuff. And obviously the memes themselves, when they're challenged the way I have with my own memes, they don't like it. Because essentially I've been trying to penetrate the ideological communities with memes that are opposite, like that probably shake a little bit of that kind of rigid thinking about what they're doing, if that makes sense. And then there's a lot of backlash and things like that have been really bizarre because of that. And it shows up in very weird ways. Like, it goes into like so crazy, but like,
do you worry that you might that you might be too aggressive in how you've been trying to do that penetration? Like, is the backlash justified or is it not justified?
Well, I think, what's underneath that question? I feel like I'm just an uncomfortable laugh there. So let me.
I can imagine both scenarios, and I think it's an entertaining question to ask because the best questions are always where you can't quite say either answer.
I think there's some level of like it's like what happens when you choose to be in the wrong relationship. Sure. And I think there's some also like, I think one of the things that people really fuck up is like mimetic penetration and physical penetration aren't the same thing, but they trigger the same trauma cues.
Sure.
So if somebody interacts with somebody who is like just penetrating the internet with memes, sometimes their body will respond to that as if it reminds them of some kind of physical trauma. And I think a lot of what I've been exposed to is that kind of confusion. because a lot of people can't actually separate the layers of reality and entangle them from each other. It's like, oh, like Tada is just actually, I'm following this person, first of all, and I'm getting upset at them by what they're doing in their own space. And it's not about like posting on the internet is not a consent question on a common sense level, right? So, but the person on the other side is often often can have a response. I think
I followed this, I selected this, I watched this, and how dare they?
yeah, exactly. How dare they? It's unsafe. It's da-da-da, and it's like, but it's not fair, and it's not how memes work.
Yeah,
the memerotic world is not, and this is something that people have a difficult time with. Is that like my thesis, at least, is that memes have sex with each other before we do. So there's some level of the world that consent is really impossible. And what I mean by that is like you don't get to choose what you're attracted to, for example.
Sure.
Do you know what I mean? You can only shape it through consent.
Yeah.
So consent is like the practice of shaping reality. And I'm going to have a podcast with
structures that are already there to a large degree.
Oh, what do you mean by that?
I mean, like the consent is at sort of different levels. Like I can consent to this, but I can't necessarily consent to the fact that I prefer one over the other. That's in a structure that comes before my consenting.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. That's like, if you want to talk about structures of consciousness, it's in the magical, I guess, the Hara one, right? Is a magical. I follow the kind of the Gibbsarian integral vibe, so it's like the
it's a little. Yeah, I heard your conversation with Jeremy, and I personally want to sort of tease apart the functional centers from the developmental stages. I think they get conflated a little bit too easily in our discussions.
Right.
But either way.
So, but it comes a priori. So, like our desires and our kind of attractions are a priori to. Where we can form consent in the mind, right? And crystallize into some kind of very practical yes or no. And so there's a lot of experience of like, I've had a lot of people be really attracted to my work and attracted to me. And so there's something in them it's beyond consent. They're just attracted and then upset that they were. Upset that what that meant for them. And then they might interpret that as some kind of, in like really wacky ways, I think. Some kind of non-consent, but it's going to like, no, consent doesn't apply to that kind of choice or non-choice. And that's kind of like the memerotic difficulty. And so some of the things that, like I've been caught in is it's like, so that becomes like a cloud. And then another thing, you take one piece of information there and it creates a person in a mirage that people can really just feel a lot of things and attack. And there's a element of like, oh, I've been just dating the wrong person. So realizing that about very ideological communities and going like, oh, I was just dating the wrong person. Essentially, I was dating somebody that, in a way, I wouldn't say aggressively penetrating. That's like, I think that's a bit too much. That's not that's not the best way to say it. But I would say maybe trying to change. So when you're trying to change somebody, you're also trying to memetically penetrate them. Sure. You're trying to put in information into the other person that is they're resistant to, and I think there's at a certain point. I don't think it's a matter of ethics in the common sense, but it's more a matter of protection, self-preservation, and wise choices. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and if I can make it really practical, I can tell you like one thing that happened that I documented. Like somebody, a person who's like a single session client of mine had, we had one session and we did some hara breathing, which is kind of a gentle belly breathing, nothing holotropic or anything like that. And they reported to me they felt this kind of intense romantic and sexual attraction to me when they did that. But they related to me a lot like a long time after it happened. And I was like, oh, okay. Essentially, the response is very vanilla in like, hey, you should maybe go and see, a body worker that works with, eroticism, or, talk to a sex coach and stuff. I felt like this is not really what I'm prepared to handle right now in the moment. I think I'm more ready now, but at the time I wasn't. And so I just I just responded very vanilla, like kind of like, and I didn't feel that way. I didn't feel that turn on. And it's okay that you did. And I think there's some reasons why. There might be some past history, ancestral trauma, and stuff like that. And a lot of the time, people, when they have those kind of patternings around power, they try to repeat the pattern and experience it in a dynamic where they can project their past onto it. So like a, client therapist, although I'm not a therapist like anymore, but like a client practitioner relationship is a relationship people really love to put their like parental caregiver issues on, right? So, and then try to replay some of the patterns. That's called transference and all that, right? So I responded to them and said like, hey, like that's yeah, you should, I'll give you a referral. And I didn't feel the same way. And that person like apparently like has signed on to some letter that said I sexually exploit clients. I was like, what the hell? Because like the evidence is like I did the exact opposite thing. I did the most vanilla thing, which is like, oh, I don't think we're ready right now to hang out. Like it felt risky for me in a way that I was like, no, 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 no. And this is like what I got anyway. So that's kind of like like and like what I'm saying, I guess, is that like I'm pretty sure this person got psychoeducated by like kind of like that memes around believing survivors. If you didn't feel safe, something happened. I'm like, no, there's like hard evidence nothing happened. You know what I mean? So this kind of psychoeducation is something I've been really railing against, and so in
When
my
you
personal life, it showed up that way. Yeah.
when you think of memes, what is it that you think of? Like how broad a concept is meme for you? Does that make
Um.
sense? Like I can like on the one
Yeah.
hand we
Yeah.
can be like, hey, it's what we say culturally, but on the other hand, I'm like, maybe the like the laws of physics are just memes that atoms exchange. Like there's a real range in how broadly we take that concept.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think it's all forms of information, and I would say I really lean towards because I talk about mimetic possession. So that's probably not part of standard memetics, but mimetic possession is like a meme tries to defend itself and will take over a human to do it. Essentially, it's the matrix because the memes live off of humans, right? We are mimetic complexes. We are units of information gathered around a center of gravity. So when our yeah, I don't know. How are you doing there?
Good. I was just thinking of
Yeah.
two different approaches to meme possession that stood out for me. Like on the one hand, I want to take it
Mm-hmm.
really seriously, and on the
Right.
other
Yeah.
hand, I think I hear people take it way too seriously sometimes. Like the people who
Right.
talk about, like the words you use, and if you're not constantly using the right words and denouncing the
Mm,
right things, you're creating the wrong reality, and that's almost like a very superstitious. These invisible things and the magic spells are making the world so. I want to take it seriously, and I want to watch out for people not taking it seriously. And me
mm,
personally, and I wonder if
mm-hmm.
this is true for you or not, the
Yeah.
somatic component is sort of the defense against that. That I can draw
Yeah.
out of that to some degree and be this instead, to have a little bit of wiggle room there.
Yeah. So I'm gonna notate. It's interesting. I'm a little bit of a weirdo on podcasts and
All
on
right.
my own too, and I'm like have a little bit of like yeah. I'm curious. Like we're talking about these things, but I'm curious about whether there's like personal stakes for you in this conversation. And I don't know. I don't think I need you to tell me what they are, but it's interesting to sit with.
Yeah. Well, I
Yeah.
try to ask things I'm personally curious about when I talk to people.
Hmm.
Like otherwise, it's not that interesting to talk to people.
Yeah. No,
And
I
my
get. Yeah. Uh huh.
yeah, my own life is like, even though I'm involved in a lot of very intellectual seeming communities and discussions, my most of my actual life is somatic, energetic practices of various kinds. So I've always got one
Mm,
eye on that because that's the larger, more important part of what I do from day to day.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm gonna tickle you a little bit and like
Yeah, go ahead.
wondering. I'm wondering even with like the cancellation stuff, if there's something in there that resonates for you, something that like pings your real life stuff. Not that I
Um,
need you to rip
yeah.
yourself open up, right?
Well,
But
it's interesting because there's like a personal thing and a community thing. Because I deal with a lot of people who I really
mm,
respect and think they have a lot of integrity and they're right, and they
mm,
are getting flack, especially if they've got professional positions. A lot of them are telling me they're under assault from
Ah,
reactionaries with advanced cognitive
right,
linguistics.
right. So like, I'm one of those people
Yeah,
in
so
a way.
I'm on the one hand trying to relate to it. It hasn't happened to me, but also I
Mm,
have a whole bunch of maybe emotional righteousness about the idea that it could happen to me. Like I have some strong social convictions where I feel like I'm always getting bothered by mishandlings of memes in the culture, and
mm.
it personally upsets me.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because I mean, if I just, being real with you, like I guess like my sense of somatic tracking, this is just my impression. It's not like I felt some levels of discomfort in our conversation from your body around the subject of account. Like, yeah, what am I getting called out by? Like, what's the content of it? And but I wasn't sure like where,
Yeah.
how you're
Yeah, some of
not.
that's like because I'm not totally sure what my role is. Part of me is like, hey, I just want to have
Mm,
a conversation. The other part is like, hey, I gotta like ask questions and frame things for people who are coming in are gonna see this video and they don't know who this guy is.
right, right, right,
Like,
right,
should I
right, right.
be trying to elicit your story more? Should I be framing it
Mm.
more? Should I be, like so I've got these two sides.
Yeah, well, I mean, do you feel like getting into the mud of things?
Well, what do you mean by mud? Let's go.
Okay, well, this is the thing, right? So like, this is my story, which you don't have
Yeah.
to buy, right? Because I'm here as the kind of member of a different tribe than you. Let's be real, right? I'm
Sure.
not part of your tribe. We're meeting though. We're at like
Yeah,
the
we're figuring
thresholds of the
this out.
tribe,
Yeah.
tribal lands, and you know, I I want like so for a long. I mean, I wonder because imagining like the stages that you're playing in the integral world and meta modern is a pretty intellectually playful space.
Yeah, it's I'd say it's very intellectually free space. Some people
Hmm.
do it more creatively than others. Some people are kind of
Hmm.
rigid about it, but everybody gives each other a lot of room.
Mm. Yeah, and so within that, I was curious about how I have been curious because in leaving really ideologically rigid spaces, so what I would call leftist spaces, I suppose I can be there are leftist ways of being that I'm friendly to. But like I mean, I'm a leftist if you want to like break it down in a silly way. Like I would probably vote left every time, right? So it's like there. But in leaving the kind of ideological communities and kind of moving into my own lands in a bit, because I'm in a kind of weird hinterland now of like essentially people who are like animist, somatic kind of practitioners who are very like not oriented towards ideology because we understand memes are fucking with you. So they're like, no, we can't actually rely on memes to sort us out. Like we have to have agency in our relationship to it. So that's kind of like our real like stance. And then from that place, right? And relating to the other tribes around us, I've been wondering about the integral kind of meta modern community, like because reaching out, hanging out with Ryan, Jeremy, and although it's not super related, like I've been over at the Stoa a little bit, and
Sure.
so there is this kind of like curiosity about how things like canceling and how behavior is handled, right? Because it's such a common thing around these kind of great intellectual thought leaders, and then people are like, oh, they're so awesome, and then you find out their personal behavior is crap
Yeah.
or something. This is such a narrative of the last 5 years, right? And my perspective is I've been caught in the vortex of that, and it's hurt me to actually be transparent with people.
Yeah.
Like I've essentially had a publishing deal like fizz out because I was, unlike other people, I was actually saying there's actually something against me. I'm not like I was actually transparent with them. This is what's happening. This is what's being said. This is my response. And ultimately, the publishing kind of conversation just like
That's
from what I know right now, it's fizzled out. So there's been real consequences of my transparency. And on the other hand, I've been wondering about how that kind of stuff is handled in communities around you because I have no idea. But my idealistic lens is like, ooh, there's like an intellectual playpen. But I do like I've been wondering about that subject. Does that make sense to you?
I
It's
think
like very
so.
pragmatic. It's very in the mud. It's very practical. But
Yeah,
because you're a podcast host, and the conversation is, are you platforming somebody who is a horrible person, has bad behavior, and they're going to do more harm by giving them more platform, right? This is the kind of
yeah,
conversation that's been going on. And then also, what about intellectual freedom and playfulness?
yeah.
And also, like, just even the format of podcasts and whole, like, a lot of the podcasts on the so-called left is all just people agreeing with each other all the time. People don't have conflicts. People don't have arguments. People don't have disagreements like on these podcasts. It's really uplifting each other in like a total tunnel vision, right? This is like the nature of podcasts on, or in like media on,
Sure.
in ideological spaces. It becomes very, very crystallized, or like not even crystallized, congealed, coagulated.
Mhm.
They're not pristine, right? It's not clean or anything. So I'd say it's more like coagulating. Although coagulation is very sexy, just putting it out there. But you know what I'm saying? It's kind of like it's kind of, I don't know. It's very aspirational and it's very monotone, and I'm really not into that
All right.
aesthetically.
Well, let me try to say a couple of words on that.
All right, right.
And
Sorry.
maybe I should tell people that like you and I have a bunch in common. You're from Ontario, living in BC. I'm from BC, living in Ontario. We've both recently interacted with Jeremy and Ryan and Peter Limburg, so we have a lot of common points. And Ryan, in particular, is really pushing forward this project of people having more difficult conversations with each other outside
Oh,
their
okay.
bubbles, right?
All right,
That's
let's
one
call
of
up
the things
Ryan.
he's really into.
Hey, Ryan, motherfucker, get in here. Okay.
I would say, one of the interesting things is from like the developmental levels point of view, there's a left and a right at every one of them. So a lot of what we call the left is not a homogenous community. It's actually several different kinds of left, or some of them might even be a higher version of right or something like that. It gets
Sure, sure.
complicated.
Mm-hmm.
They're definitely in the official integral community. There were some like early 2000s scandals.
Hmm.
I think they've largely gone away. Right now, there's a lot of people who are really concerned about the possibility of unfounded cultural attacks. But I think
Like, you
there's a
mean
lot
like
of interest in,
a lot of thought
yeah,
leader people are worried about it?
yeah, exactly. A lot of thought leaders are
Hmm.
that I talk to are sort of on edge. They're not sure how vulnerable they might be to a sudden, unexpected
Wow.
social
Yeah.
ethics onslaught.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, we need to get stronger, more robust. Like this is something Ryan and I talk about a lot, which is
Hmm.
like how to be anti-fragile. Because like the attack is coming. If it hasn't happened, then it'll happen in 5 months or 5 years or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But in an internet age, you're exposed to everybody, and some group of everybody is going to hate what you're doing. So the attack is coming.
Mm.
Is there a way to benefit from the attack, or are you just fragile and you're going to
Mm-hmm.
lose when you get attacked? And what can you do now to prepare for it? And I guess one of the things I do is just try to be as unguarded and multifarious and weird and like
Mm-hmm.
to cover that, to own all that territory myself, so that if it ever
Hmm.
gets pointed out, it doesn't matter too much. Like it
What,
won't
what,
be any
what do you mean?
crazier than anything else I've done, so to speak.
Right, right, right. Do you mean like because that's kind of like, let's see. Yeah, I'm in that process myself right now. Is like somebody said, your actual podcast is you documentation of you going crazy in public. I'm like, yeah. It's like, because what happened? Yeah, like I talk about things that I never used to, and because I was managing my public image or whatever you want to talk. That's the things I do, like you know yeah. So I kind of get that. I mean, I guess the other side is like, I was wondering if there was actually like actual things like call outs and stuff that happen in your communities, and this will get all, I'm going to make sure this all comes back to memerotics, everybody, so like
Okay, yeah,
we'll
keep
get
bringing
there.
it back. I mean,
But this is important. This is actually really core. This is actually very core in talking about humans and memes and the interaction and what to do, right? This is actually very practical
yeah,
stuff.
yeah, I think so, and
Mhm.
it's going to be more and more practical each year as we keep moving into the digital world.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the more
So some of
highly abstract mimetic world. Yeah.
the discussion, I guess, in the integral community around callouts is around sort of like who have we been like, for example, for a while, Ken Wilber was associated with a couple of thinkers who turned out to either be like, called a cult leader, or their community revolted, or it turned out this guy had some sex accusation in his past.
Mm-hmm,
And then the
mm-hmm.
question is, were we platforming them? Were we denouncing them adequately? All these sorts of things, or should we not even worry about that? So I feel like it's a very undecided thing in the community, because some people are very much on the we need to privilege the ethics part, and we need to privilege the public messaging of our ethics. Then the other half of the community, I think, is that's really fragile and reactive, and we got to treat things responsibly, but we can't start acting like that, because that's going to force us into the conventional mold that everybody else gets trapped in, and there's no new developmental space if we get trapped in the conventional mold.
Right. And in light of that, it's like, well, it's been interesting for me to watch is, let's say, somewhere like Rebel Wisdom, right? And I know that's not integral, but, it's like all these communities.
We're allies.
We're allies, right? Yeah, sure. Like a neighboring tribe or whatever you want to call it.
I call them cousin communities.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, for example, like, I think Rebel Wisdom started out with a lot of, like, curiosity. What's this all? Like, it really started off, to me, it felt like on the backs of cancel culture, what do you want to call it, and going like, hey, I think we're acting in this fucked up way where in the culture wars is a reflection of this, like, memes running wild kind of. I don't know if that was analysis back then, but there's something about like talking to various people, different points of view, and like the Rebel Wisdom was kind of based in that, right? And like had like a, it was kind of a refuge for some people in a way, like, you know what I mean? Like, people can go on there with opinions that they would probably get destroyed on the Twitter by, right?
Yeah, sometimes I think of like there's safe spaces for ears, which are places where, like, I don't have to hear things that trigger me, but there need to be safe spaces for tongues, which is like where it's okay.
Right. Yeah. No, that's cool. Yeah. I mean, I think most of the world should be safe space for tongues. And then, like, I don't know. That's a whole conversation. But I think it's interesting that I was like, oh, but now they're like totally going after Brian Rose. So it's really interesting like that. And they're like, it's a lot of the same stuff that I've called people out for. It's like, it's just really interesting to see, Rebel Wisdom like really spending a lot of time on Brian Rose, because I was going like, oh, that's fascinating, because it's kind of like the snake eating its own tail. So there's
it comes out of such a personal, instinctive place. What's the, there's this Noam Chomsky quote, because he defended these Holocaust deniers back in the day. And he said, free speech only exists if it protects things you hate. Otherwise it has no meaning, right? But like, we all have these instincts about, this is acceptable. I'm a tolerant person because I tolerate the things I tolerate. Right. But as soon as something is outside that, then even if it's the Rebel Wisdom guys, they've got instincts just by the virtue of their temperament. And there's a lot of stuff that's difficult for them to take in, even if they are ostensibly holding the open-minded position.
Well, I think it was a really, I do wonder if there's a sense of like, oh shit, that is going too far. Yeah. You know what I mean? And then also, but I actually, think that isn't a bad thing. And like, yeah, there are actual, like, freedom isn't totally free. Like, equality isn't totally equal. There's like this kind of absolutism about memetics and stuff that seemed to got edged. And I actually think I was like, oh, I feel like there's some prudence in that, but it's just interesting for me to watch, because I feel like everybody is dealing with the guru problem at the end of the day. Because I think, different communities are like, oh, stop attacking gurus, and then they're like, oh fuck, we had to attack some gurus now. Oh well, fuck. Do you know what I mean? And then other communities are like, fuck all the gurus, fuck all this shit. But when you look at memetics, it's not how it works. Yeah. And I think that's the thing that I feel like I'm trying to actually personally navigate as well, of being a kind of guru myself. And so my project right now is, how stupid can I look?
Yeah.
Like, being that person, how dumb can I look in public?
That's a tricky balance. And I think it's essential, because
it's essential.
To be able to look as dumb as it is possible for you to look, is ideal, as long we don't whatever doesn't sacrifice the actual function that's associated with your role or whatever that is.
Yeah.
Right, because there's a sort of I mean, there's this dialogue's been going on in the big name guru community for the last half of the 20th century, which is, to what degree do they need to be able to symbolically present themselves as the authority figure and take everyone's transference in order to fulfill their function maximally? And on the alternative side is, to what degree would that function work even better if they could just reveal their humanity with much more richness?
So let me tell you something that I've been working on, thinking about. Well, okay, so we land. Okay, I'm gonna go to the washroom. You can pause because we landed a whole scaffolding. Yeah. All right, I'm back. All right. How much time do we have? We're just getting into it. So
we're just getting into it. Like, we can go over. I don't care.
Oh yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
I always go over. Okay. So let's break it down a little bit.
Yeah. What's on your mind?
So. Let me see. I'm gonna do a little bit of belly breathing. If you feel it, if you're into it yourself, you can come with me. So, this is such a multifaceted problem and question. It's a problem / question, because problem, it recognizes the fuckery, and then question recognizes the fascination, right? Number one thing is that the Hegelian dialectic, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, the process by recombinatorial memetic replication works, is inherently sexual, or erotic if you want to call it. The mixing of memes, synthesizing a new meme, that's what a human is, literally. People fuck and they produce new offspring that's a new memetic complex that takes characteristics of the old and has all the information attached to it. And we do that in art. We do that when we're playing music with somebody else. We do that when in conversation right now, right? So the reality is, even when we met, there's a mammalian part of us. We're supposed to get along. That's the premise of the podcast. But not necessarily. We're actually like dogs sniffing each other going, what are we going to do? Are we going to fight? Are we going to fuck? Like, what are we going to do? What species are you? What's your territory? That's instinctual to us. And I think that's a part of us that often doesn't get recognized. Now, what am I saying here? I think I lost a little bit of the track of it, but
went too far into the dog.
Yeah, too far. Fuck. But there's a mammalian aspect of us that's tied to our memetic systems as well. So the memes are also doing that with each other, right? It's kind of like how you can think about it. And navigating this, the tribalism that comes with that, wow, it's a real fuck show. But why I call the work that I'm kind of researching, I would say memerotics, is like meme and eroticism. So recognizing that humans actually get erotically charged when they're receiving or giving information, whether that's penetration or devouring, puncturing or enveloping, whatever. We are in an erotic exchange, right? That's what drives, on a foundational level, human interaction. That drives the whole world, but let's just narrow it down, right? It drives the whole universe, but fuck, whatever. Let's call it human, right? So the guru thing is like essentially somebody with a really fucking big dick and people worshiping, because that's like part of our like cultural code of like, if somebody has a big piece of information everybody wants, it becomes like a phallus that everybody gathers around, and people disown. The gurus themselves disown often, and how sex has been treated in our society, disown that's even their drive of why they're doing it. Like, I have no qualm saying that I wanted to become famous to get laid. That project is going very badly. But I have no qualms telling people that's part of it. And it was a very stupid idea.
Sure.
But the thing about gurus is that that's like at the center of it, there is some erotic drive of to have that much attention, have that many people stroking your phallus. Doesn't matter what your gender is. It's kind of like, especially when you're talking about crystallized knowledge, it's a masculine trait. So it's phallic, right? Crystallized knowledge versus kind of like etheric, right? So this is where the whole patriarchy, matriarchy, and all those things start to develop. That's part of the issue of the eroticism of knowledge transfer is not really owned. And it's like people are like, oh, what? Why did this person like do this? Like even like on both sides, on the side of like, oh, why did that person that, you know, it looks like so good and they have all these great ideas, why did they do something so violating and so abusive to their followers? And then on the other hand, you have like, oh, this person, I thought they were like an asshole, I thought they were abusive, but I just learned that, oh my God, people are just talking about them in a fucked up way and they've been pillaged on, right? The reality is that's a feature, not a bug. That's the problem. Like, it's like, no, it's because that knowledge transfer is innately erotic and our bodies interpret that as sexual. So that whole abuse stuff of like gurus abusing their followers, it's built in. It's built in because it's an erotic sexual desire and it's driving the behavior, but everybody's saying that's not happening and creating power structures where it's really unethical and really difficult to engage in a reasonably consensual sexual relationship even.
Yeah, and it's got to be much more acknowledged in order to be done in a better, healthier, more graceful way rather than a chromatic way.
Yeah, exactly. And then on the opposite end, you have people who are like abiding by the thing and they don't even like, honestly, this is the position I was in, right? I had no fucking idea people are essentially like getting off of my work erotically, sexually. Like I know that's like fun for me to put on my work and my jabby Instagram memes and stuff like that, right? But you know, I'm an Asian guy that grew up in the 90s. I'm a little bit, you know, I'm going bald. I'm a little bit chubby. You know what I mean? I'm like short. Like I have no idea that this is happening. But on the other side, and you know, I mean, I probably should have had more idea, right? But it's just my social conditioning, right? On the other side, I realize there's a lot of people are starting to, hey, dude, like, no, there's a lot of people, and especially a lot of my community, it's very femme or female, and there's very few masculine people in it. And I'm a pretty smart kid. So the combination, not bad looking apparently. So the combination of that, I didn't know that I was getting that kind of attention. It was totally mismatched. If that makes sense.
Do you think if your parts had been more integrated or harmonized or cross-pollinating each other that you would have known?
Oh yeah, I know now.
Yeah.
I found out through the cancellation process that, oh shit, all these people are like had this really erotically charged relationship with me. First of all, they're not owning it either a lot of the time. You know what I mean? But their relationship to me, even though I don't even know them, is so charged because they have this like memerotic relationship with me that, yeah, they don't know what to do. It's like they worship my meme dick, essentially. And I never was like, oh, you can do that. But I guess that happens. Okay, whoops, I didn't think about that. Did you see what I mean? So it's like both, in both cases of this kind of accountability abuse stuff that I talk about and the guru abuse stuff, it's actually the same thing. It's really about people not really being right and understanding that knowledge transfer is inherently erotic sexual and going to hit all those cues. And so there is one part of it is like when you create systems and structures around knowledge transfer that has all these hierarchies and certifications and gatekeeping, that creates the power differential that the abuse occurs in.
Right.
Yeah. And I'm a person that's actually starting to remove those power differentials, which is kind of my project. I was like, oh, well, like, and this moves towards like a bigger project of mine is I'll say that I'm moving towards pornography as like my main metaphor and maybe not metaphor, like pornographer, philosopher.
Sure.
And so that's a whole different thing now. And it's like, oh, like I will, like, you know, like if you go towards pornography, you're fucking fans. Essentially, like, I want to work with this person. Like, yeah, sure. All right, let's shoot a porno. Like that's a little bit. That's the podcast actually.
Yeah.
The guests, like, so it's like Ryan, you know, we're on a podcast, we're talking about, oh, let's have meme sex. And it is kind of literal. It's like there's, you know, like I'm straight, you know, Ryan's cute, but I'm like, you know, he's a bro with me. Like, but underneath there is still like an erotic charge, even and so I'm interested in like developing that, and making it more and more transparent, making that eroticism behind memetic transfer really transparent, and kind of moving the practices of creating memes and playing with them into a more transparent form that I think is much more preventative against the kind of abuses that we've been seeing. And of course, in doing that process, I think people who are really in the traumatized place around guru abuse probably can't get rid of their projection. They can't tell the difference between what I'm doing and somebody who's abusive is doing, if that makes sense, because it's just the same triggers. But like when I say, you know, when I start removing these kind of boundaries between me and my audience, they start freaking out, because I think partially they want that differential because they're turned on by it. Actually, they're erotically kind of had this like fantasy about me being some kind of parental figure, you know, that they can attach to. And when I start taking those things away, they start freaking out. That's also something I've seen. If that makes sense, they want that there. I'm like, no.
Sure, that's an organizing. I mean, we don't do transference for no reason. We do it because it helps organize our reality field.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
If the transference goes away, then I've got to reorganize it some other way, and that's very anxious.
Well, and to be honest, I think a lot of the call-outs against me was as actually a big part of me doing that, and people didn't like it. In a way, people did not like that. I think on some subconscious level, they didn't like that I was starting to do that. And they don't get to do that projection of like this perfect kind of parental figure. I'm like, no, I'm going to get hella weird. And so I'm trying to move towards like, how stupid can I look publicly in my project? Because I realized this is silly. Do you know Kirill was here?
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah. So, you know, Kirill is kind of an asshole, but I mean, his podcast with Asa Akira was pretty awesome, but I was realizing it's like, oh, I was just paying attention. Everybody hates him, and he's probably a nicer person than everybody hates him for. But he's probably still like, you know, a bit nuts. Really nuts, actually. But he is actually a meme that I've been kind of feeding on a little bit and going like, huh. And I was like, oh, this person is like a novelty fuck. Do you know what I mean? People like following this person, but they don't worship him because he looks publicly stupid. And I was like, oh, this is a great thing for me to understand, because it's you can actually be well known memetically, but doesn't mean that you need to be up on a pedestal in a way. Or and people might be like wanting access to you and like clamoring for access. Do you know what I mean?
I mean, this erotic operation can happen at all the different functional levels, but even at any of the levels, there's different styles, right? The pedestal thing is like, sounds to me, it's like one style. There's a lot of different styles. There's the novelty fuck. There's the you know, fuck where you think, oh, this has a future, or right? There's like all kinds of different styles of
yeah, exactly. So the pedestal is like the very phallic way of doing it, right? This is like my tower. You know, this is the tower from which I proselytize and come gather below me and ha 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 ha. I think that's funny. I think that's hilarious. That's funny. I mean, all of it's fucking funny. But the thing I'm trying to move towards is actually, I begrudgingly call queer because I think queer in and of itself, like, I guess I consider myself a queer person if you really define things, but I think there's even more expansive terminology than that, and understanding that is larger than, when I say queer, people expect certain behaviors in me, so I don't love that being put on me. But anyways, there's also a vaginal approach as opposed to just a phallic approach of like, hey, this is a community, this is a place where I play with. So kind of like what I'm doing right now is, instead of just being this phallic tower beam, is actually kind of a person who plays with my audience, literally, like on the podcast, like I play with my past clients, like I play with colleagues, but we're actually engaged in play. And that has, I think, a different quality of invitation, which is kind of like receiving, if that makes sense, receiving the audience, a different style. And you can have both.
What's coming up for me is this, if I bring in the lens of like levels or something like that, which
Sure.
you don't always have to do.
Yeah, I have a hard time navigating around it, but I get it.
Yeah,
I think it's a little bit too cognitive for me, but
I'll come on your show and we'll talk about it for an hour.
if you come on my show, okay, all right. Those are fighting words, all right.
And then you can dig in my ideas.
Okay, all right.
I was thinking of like,
honestly, I like that.
Let's do it.
I'm going to book one.
Something that's a form of potency at one level might be a form of kind of impotence at a next level. And, what I'm thinking of is, Slavoj Žižek, the Slovenian culture philosopher?
Is he the guy who railed on Jordan Peterson?
Yeah, they had a debate together. They got very different styles. But one of the things, Žižek is trained in like Lacanian psychoanalysis in France. And he often will get introduced. And at the beginning of the talk, he'll say, according to Lacanian psychoanalysis, castration is the gap between who you really are and who you're perceived or thought to be. So he thanks his hosts for castrating him as the opening move.
Oh, wow. All right. That's a little bit hotter. That's sexy. I like that.
Everybody's impression of me that would capture their transference. At one level, that's my potency. But I want to go to another level where I look back and go, oh, that wasn't my potency at all. That was my impotence.
Interesting. Yeah, that's been part of my process.
Between myself and the public view. How do I get out of that to get to some other potency that I really want?
Well, that's actually been part of my cancellation thing too, because the transference to me was like, Tada is this like crazy, horny, weird somatic practitioner that, hangs around, is like very flirtatious, drinks and like parties too much. Like that was kind of like I was like, I am that person. Like just a lot more ethical than you think. Do you know what I mean? It's do
you ever tell people that it's pronounced tada?
Yes. No, I don't. I fucking hate that actually. Why did you put that in? The fuck, man? You had to?
It seems like the obvious thing.
Oh, okay. I mean, no, but yeah, there was like people who, and it gets into the whole Jesus meme too, because some of the people who call me out were like very Christian, and they're trying to discover like Black Jesus, and I was like, guess what the fuck Black Jesus is probably like? They're probably a lot like me. And I'm not saying that I'm like Kanye, but like Yeezy, but like it's really interesting, like the horny, erotic, dancing, partying philosopher. That archetype, people have a lot of feelings about it.
Yeah.
And a lot of Christian folks have a lot of feelings about it. But it's funny because, there's a great book called Dancing in the Streets where you actually take a look, is like the original cult of Jesus is very Dionysian. Mm-hmm. And I think this is kind of like, because, after the laughs, like Jesus like drinks wine and eats meat and shit, like, and sits around tables and sings. Like, what the fuck do you think he was doing? Especially in that geo region, right? It's like, no, Jesus was a fucking partier. It's fucking obvious. He's like the guy at the party, hanging out with sex workers, like, you know what I mean? The common folk, like, this is what he's down with. And so that has also been an interesting kind of thing to look at, and how, that I don't know why I got into that, but it all gets into like, I'm a street dancer, so it's like a part of, I think, my nature that is from that world, and bring it into a very like a puritanical ideological space. They just didn't. There's a part of it that they didn't get. They didn't get my attitude. Like that's underneath it all. It actually holds my work together. And I don't know why I'm like slightly losing track of my stuff here. What do you got to say? What do you? Oh yeah. So yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Hold on. I'll say. I mean. I'm not promising yet, but the idea of fucking with you on my podcast is entertaining.
All right.
And one of the reasons why I wanted to get into, because I mentioned the street dance thing, is battling. So this is a thing that I've been really into as a meme, is because in street culture, so that's like in street hip hop culture or street dance culture, you can't get away without having skills. You cannot get away with it. Because if you don't, it's going to get recorded and been shown on TV, and everybody's like, oh, dude. Do you know what I mean? Like, So all the people who are elders in mind in the dance, essentially from the 60s and 70s, who are like black and brown folks, mostly from the hood, like when they go into different neighborhoods, they battled each other. And whoever won, they get their jacket and stuff. You know what I mean? The girls watching are like, oh, that guy lost. Like, you know, and I present that in mostly hetero way because their community is pretty hetero.
So you're thinking erotic meta level podcast battle?
That's the culture and trying to create a little bit of. That's not saying that the dogs sniffing each other and going, "Who are you?" And that's why I said I'm from a different tribe than you are.
Yeah.
And the assumption shouldn't be that we'll just get along even. Or I think there is something about okay, so this is a bigger thing. Is like because the battle is a fight that is erotic, right? And when you have a battle, it's like the way straight men fuck each other. Basically, they get into a circle, they put on music, and music and the rhythm is the feminine, right? The rhythm, the polyrhythm, and I'm like really using gender in a binary way, but just hold on, right? Because I'm not necessarily a cis person, so just for folks to take that in when I'm talking casually, and I also have more complex layers, right? But there's this feminine thing, and then you have dudes or people embodying the masculine, because my dance is a fairly masculine dance in its sharpness and stuff. Like it's like a robotic dance, right? All that stuff. And they're battling each other, but it's like a fight that's erotic. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Because dancing is the one art that goes from fighting to fucking. That you can fuck in it and you can fight in it. It moves the spectrum. And when different tribes meet, that's what they do. And by meeting and fighting and battling and establishing each other's skill levels, or seeing, hey, what's your stuff? This is my stuff. And it happens on an irrational level. It's not a cognitive level behavior. These conflicts and things get sorted out. And what it also does is make sure that people who are all talk can't climb up the ladder. Because if you lose the battle, everybody knows, and everybody goes bye. So like in the street dance culture, like if you're teaching a workshop and a student thinks you're whack, they can call you out. And you'll have to kind of battle them, and it'll be footage on the internet of that happening. And I find that is actually, I don't say we need to totally do that, but when this is kind of part of my project overall, is this whole playful thing, is establishing this kind of culture of playing with each other. And when I mean battling, it doesn't have to be fisticuffs. It could just be playful sparring that is documented,
I agree
captured,
completely, and I think it's an absolutely essential counterweight to the tendency of people in these spaces to get really abstract and superficial and complex. Like I went down years ago. I went down to the Integral Theory Conference, the first one I ever went to in 2015. And I'm going to give this presentation called "What the Fuck is Meta Theory?" And I realized I don't have time. Like the amount of time they've given me, I can't cover my topics. So I'm out at a party the previous night, and I'm talking to this girl, and she's like, "Why don't you just do the Q&A?" And I'm like, "That's brilliant," right? Because I think I know what I'm talking about, but I have this structure. Instead, I go in and I just throw it open to questions right away. Right. And now I have to fucking deal with everybody and what's coming up.
That's exactly
right. And the idea is that's a practice that develops a skill set. And we need a community that has the skill set, not a community that has the talking points.
Yeah, exactly. And what I talk about is like all the people all the motherfuckers in my community, they're like that have like clout, they're all choreographers.
Right.
It's choreography. So like people get on a stage and they go, you go left, you go right, you go turn 1 and 2 and da, da, da. And you invite those people down. Hey, do you want to get dirty with me? I can call you out for some shit. Let's fucking go. They leave the room. And what makes me fucking angry, so angry, is that there's this Dunner crooning threshold. So like the competence threshold to be able to perceive what's happening in your environment.
Sure, yep.
The culture's not past that. And part of that's like white supremacy, part of that's white culture. That's embedded within ideological communities, like the fabric of it, because it's the academic side of it or whatever. I don't know why, but people don't have this. Like for me, if somebody calls you out and you walk away from it and it's a substantial call, you lose. You should be done. You're done. But if people can't perceive that's what's happening, they go into like, oh, well, maybe call outs are bad, or it's like, no, that's not the point. Like, there needs to be a larger culture that holds our differences, or holds our tribal differences. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's
Yeah,
a space in which people have to be encouraged to have the right kind of energetic exchanges. Right. And
that's
those
right.
take all kinds of different forms. It's not just a community in which we all just nominally like each other and agree to the same things. We have to know how to do these energetic performances with each other, or it's not a real culture at all.
Right. Or yeah, and it's also like, it's never going to be perfect, but like I'm willing to like get on my podcast and talk to the people who tried to cancel me directly in an exchange. I'm very happy. Like you can see me getting lit up, right? I was like, that's like I mean, I have the dream of like, I mean, this is a little bit crazy, but restorative justice for me would be like, I should probably not say this, but I'm gonna anyways, is like filming a porno with some of the people who have been against me. And I'm not saying like, I'm not saying that in an aggressive way,
Yeah.
but it means like to be able to honor the actual erotic energy that was there in a way that's transparent.
Right.
And I'm saying the ultimate hilarious form of that would be like a literal porno if we all consent to that.
That's the
And we consent waivers, the 2257, all that stuff. But
it's the hilarious cartoon version of the ability to actually enact and fulfill and work with the energies whose previous thwart led to the problem.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly. So that is the kind of shit I really want to be doing. I'm really excited about like that. So I'm like really interested in like, I guess like pornography and philosophy to me are like, it's like the upper dantian and the lower dantian kind of like connecting, because the contemplative and then like just the BDSM, just like creating that bridge, and like the microcosmic small orbit like that circulates is something I feel like very interested in as kind of like my life praxis. And that's kind of like why I'm doing the podcast the way I am. It's all leading up to, or it's like iteratively developing itself, is because I consider my podcast a piece of pornography too, in the sense that memetic exchange is erotic and that's being captured. And I had a podcast. I don't know if you saw, but JJ Akinlade. Do you know JJ?
I know him a little bit. I didn't see him on your thing.
Oh, he hangs around on like the meta modern kind of spaces. He introduced me to them and stuff, and we were talking logically, and I was kind of like, fuck, I don't understand this guy, because he's talking on levels that I'm just kind of like too stupid for or whatever. So I was like, he's a spoken word artist, and he just like, I was like, he just delivered the poem like midway through, and I was like, okay, that's cool. I guess that ends the podcast. But then when that ended, and I was like, fuck this, let's come back. So I paused the podcast, and we just ended on his poem, and it was like 40 minutes, and then we talked after I paused, and I was like, maybe there's something we should do. Maybe we should get into a poetry exchange. I've never done this before. Like, this guy's like a pretty excellent slam poet, or I don't know if it's called slam, but he's an excellent spoken word artist. Sure. And he rhymes and shit off, and I was like, we're going to freestyle. And I've never done it. So this is kind of an erotic exchange that we started getting in. And then we pressed the record button again, and we got into about 30 minutes of like figuring out. It was kind of like, Dara told me that it's like watching kids have sex for the first time, like teenagers have sex for the first time. Like they're like, how do you do it? You put the condom on. Are you gonna turn around while you get changed there? Like, it's kind of like really like, how do we do this? We're like trying to figure out how to have this kind of like erotic exchange that's very innocent.
Yeah, and I think
very sublimated. Yeah,
being able to recognize and affirmatively go into that juvenile beginning part.
Yeah.
Like that's essential to opening up any of our centers, because wherever we've got any kind of blockage, opening up means opening up in a place where we don't have a lot of skill, where we're going to feel like beginners.
And there's such a thing about like, because I mentioned like, it's like watching kids have sex. So like, that's probably like people like freaking out even just at the words. But I think one of the things that in our culture that's really fucked up is, first of all, sex is a lot of things, and we get so shut down around like children having a central erotic quality about the experience, so like I was talking to somebody, this comes back to dance again. In a lot of Africanist communities, if a kid starts dancing to music and shaking their hips, you know what I mean? The adults start creating a circle around, they encourages and claps along, like, go, Johnny, go, or like, go, Lisa, whatever, right? And they're encouraging. the person to shake it out, shake their ass, and a lot of people hate seeing that from the outside. They come in like they're like, oh, that's like, oh, is that like okay and stuff? And I think there's a lot of erotic fragility in our dominant culture around stuff like that, and doesn't know actually how. See, this is the part that I think where people start confusing me. It's like really honoring that in a way that's not exploitative or oppressive. And as adults, I think we do that through like poetry, like me and JJ did, from that juvenile place, or like drama, or dancing, or any kind of artistic exchange. We get to access those moments that where in a dominant culture didn't allow us to express ourselves in when we're in more juvenile states erotically, or we've been infringed upon, right, as children, like sexually abused and stuff. So that, like, and usually, in environments where there's sexual abuse, there is the polar opposites of like, as a child, your eroticism and sensuality is suppressed, and you can't is oppressed, and you can't do that. That's not okay. That's not pure. And then there's also the other side of what happens underneath is all this like abuse and violation, right? That happens, and it is because like I think a lot of us as adults are afraid of that kind of really juvenile, young, artistic eroticism, and don't know how to deal with that, and get triggered into our own stuff, right? I mean, this is like I'm like shoveling the shit now, but yeah.
Like there's a lot of talk about how we make a better civilization, which is like full spectrum flourishing or whatever that means, right? But so many of those things are like, well, here's what people should believe, or here's the new technology, or here's the different kind of social order we would need, and that's all very legitimate. But there's this personal, energetic, and childhood developmental thing that's so key to that, because to support a full spectrum flourishing, people have to grow up in a way where on the one hand all their energies are safe from undue interference, but on the other hand they're able to express and be beginners and play with those energies in a way that's accepted, so they can get better at doing that and owning that about themselves.
Well, yeah, so this is the problem that you have is like, so I wouldn't say fully safe, because sometimes that gets into absolutism. That'll never happen, right? In the world, that we have to accept that. But what I would say is that there is definitely a lot of like, how would I say, it's like shit. What were we talking about again? I got a little bit high myself. It's about like kids flourishing, develop. Oh yeah. This is the problem I have with ideological communities. It's like kind of like, guys, I talk about like neurology over ideology. It's like, which do you think is running the show? It's our neurology. It's our attachment stuff. It's all that. It's like behaviors over ideology. You know what I mean? You're talking about left and right start acting the same at a certain point, and it's like, no, it's like insecure attachment behaviors are all the same. It's like regardless of where they're going, and I think and they all support each other, and they spiral with each other. And so I think something about that, like, how do we have full spectrum society? I think it's very correct to say that we really need to start off with really basic things like childhood development stuff, and not worry about thoughts. Don't worry about the memes. It's about like, there's a way, I still haven't fully mapped it out, but there's a way in which memes and behavior map onto each other, and how our behavior can change memes. You know what I mean? Change the nature of the meme. So for example, the Belief Survivors meme, if we had the sense to ingest that meme and not make it a monocrop within us, and like ground ourselves and like, okay, maybe in the past I've been dismissing people too much, so I'm going to adjust my behavior. And when people tell me a story of harm, I'm going to look at myself, reflect upon, where am I denying that, that this might have happened because I look up to somebody or something? Where am I not clear-headed? So in changing our behavior and our attachment relationship, we've actually changed the nature of the meme. We transformed the meme's behavior. And maybe you would be also the person's like, I'm going to stop, just like keep copying and pasting these Belief Survivor memes that just tell people to take the simple, intense behavior. I'm going to change that differently. So now you've transmuted the meme, you've grounded the meme, and the meme has actually been reshaped through your body. That's one of the things that humans can do. And I think that's a really, really important understanding of my friend Portia Richardson called like meme management. Yeah. As adults, we have to learn meme management. Like we all have to be like kind of shamanic practitioners at some level, which is what
I think we have to,
most people do,
style and content get so mixed up in my mind because there's so many ways.
That's right. That's how you
Somebody
talk about it.
says,
Styles
hey,
like behavior, right? Yeah.
I love Allah. And you're like, okay, are you like the most sophisticated Sufi sage in the world, or are you an Islamic terrorist? I have no idea, right? But
Yes.
if you have that structure, you could raise that structure, you could refine it, you could make it more sophisticated or deeper or more assimilated. And I think that always involves connecting it to more parts of yourselves. So you have more like leeway, but you're like, how does it feel in my body? What's my emotion? What's my thought? If I can get these things in play together, they can kind of both correct each other, but also merge with each other and make something better.
Yeah, and I'm not sure. I would challenge you that style is like the best language for that, because I think
the reason I use it is because it's the opposite of the normal, where people are like, well, I don't want style, I want some real content. So I feel like it inverts that.
So maybe that's a little bit of your like attachment to that narrative, that because what I'm hearing a lot more is behavior.
Yeah,
and aesthetic,
but behavioral style, like the way the behavior goes down.
Yeah,
and,
I guess
it's how, not what's would be another way to say it, or
I mean, I guess it's just like my orientation is so somatic when I don't have cues to how to envision it embodied. When I hear style, I think of dance style.
Sure.
And to me, there's like cool ways to dance style, and there's uncool ways.
Yeah.
And that's actually the style of the content.
More like the Tao, like the way something happens rather than technically what happened. Like, if you stood up, how did you stand up? You worship Jesus, but how do you worship Jesus?
The process by which it happens. That's a style. Yeah. Okay, so it's like an aesthetic then.
Yeah, much closer to aesthetic. Yeah, and a lot of my thinking on this comes out of Nietzsche and really putting aesthetics as a primary component of understanding.
Okay. So this is one thing I've been talking about is like, okay, so wait, hold on. Where does content come from then? Because like, what is content?
But content is kind of like a stand-in for the word categories in a way. Like, I always say, like, when we will want to talk about developmental levels in art,
or it's like genre and styles or something like that.
Could be, yeah. Like, let me give you two examples. One example is
what's a more pee again in a second.
Okay, what's a more spiritual piece of art? My painting of the Buddha or Van Gogh's painting of a dirt field, right? So, like, I put the higher content in, but it's not the higher painting. The higher painting is irrespective of the content because his dirt field is diaphanously radiant, and mine's
but that's also your subjectivity. But I kind of get the vibe that you're talking about.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. How did it go down versus what do we consider to be the type of thing that went down?
I think you're approaching a level of clarity there, but I think it's still a little bit fuzzy. I would challenge you on that. It's still a little bit like abstract in a way that I'm like, but I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
Which is, it's kind of like, if I get really curious, it's like you can have hip hop. Mm-hmm. And it could be like Macklemore, and it could be like Reflection Eternal, and if you call them both hip hop, and I like hip hop, and then you're like, oh yeah, like it fucking starts not to make any sense when everybody knows it's like, I don't know. I mean, I don't give a shit about Macklemore, so I guess like, but I mean, maybe he's cool. I don't know. Fuck, I don't even know what to like do with white rappers. Like, okay, white rappers. Is it who's good from third base? Oh fuck. Do you know third base? Anyways, there's historically great white rappers. Macklemore is not fucking one of them. Okay. Third base. I forgot what his name was, but anyways, he was in Bamboozled by Spike Lee as the white rapper in Spike Lee. So I mean, Spike Lee's Bamboozled, but you can go track that. But it's like kind of like, so if you call that all hip hop, so like this is the thing, like the people who like pop music, like all the pop music, but it's all the same genre. Or it can be all different genres, but it can be the pop.
Exactly.
It can be also people who like trash of all genres, like the trash. And so like, like, yeah, I'm into Reflection Eternal, and I'm also like, I like, if I'm into folk music, like I like a certain aesthetic of folk music that I'm like, like it gives me like a connective vibe of like I collect records, like so. Yeah. There's something about like, yum, that's cross genre actually. Yeah. So it's so like this is the way in which like things like our conversations and activism and ideologies have evolved. It's like, oh yeah, this person is a blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And I'm like, but the aesthetic to me is whack. I don't give a fuck.
Yeah, exactly. Like if I'm
Does that make
watching
sense?
Netflix and I watch 2001, and Netflix thinks I love science fiction movies. And I'm like, no, I love movies that are as intense as Stanley Kubrick movies. That's what I'm looking for.
Exactly. And a lot of the way the memetics have worked in like ideological communities is the conflation of those things,
Yeah.
right? So people have lumped me in with other people. I'm like, and I realized I've been playing the game too. Where I went wrong was like the way I explain it is like a lot of people are like, I don't know, Ja Rule is cool, but unlike a backpack rapper, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like my attitude is like most deaf, like Common, like that's kind of like how I grew up in hip hop. And then some people grew up in the generation after, which is like Ja Rule and kind of like rough, like so all that shit's cool, but it's like then it starts getting into shit that's really commercial. I'm not into it, and I've been like caught in this weird wanting the same things maybe as the people who achieve that kind of commercial type success achieve, as opposed to an artistic success that's really really ingrained in my soma as an aesthetic. That's something I've been confused about. So I think for me that's really a reflection of a lot of things that's been happening to me, is like no, like I'm a different kind of cat than like the genre of embodied activism or even cultural somatics people have been putting me under. It's like, but yeah, I'm not, that doesn't mean I want to work with or talk to these other people in my same genre at all. Do you know what I mean? Like I might rather work with like somebody who has an aesthetic and vibe and play with mine that is maybe across a different table. Can I go pee?
Yeah. Go ahead. I'm pausing.
I think we should talk a little
Switcheroo.
dress change. Oh, that's like a whole. This is like a more East Village look or something.
Yeah, this is my hipster version.
Oh, nice. Should I change? But what do I think about? I think this leads into like what I think about animism. Like animism to me is like the funk. You know, it's like when people from different lands carrying hand drums can all come together and go boom, 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 like, and then people are like, and they can all dance. They're like, yeah, like and all mixed together and play something funky. Like that's animism to me. It's not all the same. Some people's animism is fucking whack, frankly.
Yeah, I heard on your podcast this musical metaphor, which I really liked, which was on the one hand, you were talking about the way all lives matter and Black Lives Matter work.
Oh shit, you saw that one.
Yeah, and also the way like these different kind of overlapping communities could play off each other. Like
yeah. I didn't release that one publicly. That was interesting.
That whole way of thinking is fantastic. And I often think of my idea of sanity is sort of a symphony of mental illnesses. Like any one of the instruments.
Yeah. It's like mental illnesses, each being a different rhythm, right?
Yeah. And any one of them on their own would be pathological, but working together, they're great.
Or too intense.
Yeah,
and like I would say, call it an inability to modulate it.
Exactly. Like I don't mind. I need the right amount of anxiety. I don't mean my anxiety to like predominate my whole experience.
Well, yeah, but I mean, so that's kind of like what you might call schizophrenia is an unmodulated spiritual experience.
Yeah, exactly.
So but good trance is like a modulated schizophrenia, essentially. And it's probably why people think I'm going crazy. Because I don't know if you saw
thinking of trance earlier when you were talking, because I've done a little bit of hypnotherapy and, as a practitioner. And one of the things you do a lot is take people into an idea set or a memory or something that they've already got that change the affect that goes with it. Right. Yeah. And I forget what it was, but something you were saying a few minutes ago made me really think about shifting the affect that goes with particular memes in order to liberate ourselves from the way they're locked in.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's, if you want the goods, Layman, you want the goods,
Tada.
The goods. All right. So this is part of the goods. All right. So like the dances, the historic dances, right, that we know are the ways in which people tamed memes, y'all. So like there's a dance like called tutting where you create like 90-degree angles, kind of like King Tut.
Sure.
I mean, I'm not very good at it, so don't fucking, but you create, right?
Yeah.
That's a taming of the meme. of the right angle, which has completely dominated our environment. So that this is very real. Like we're talking about changing the affect, and how we have practices like dance that are actually historically been about like what happens when a society is not able to tame memes and have a relationship to memes on a very basic level in the body is kind of the world that we're living in.
Yeah.
Yeah. So some of the memes love that because some of the memes don't want to be tamed by humans at all. So this is the kind of meme wars we're in, right? Like the complex layers of it. But the dances are really about changing the affect of the meme.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Does that make sense? Like,
yeah, the
yeah.
German band Rammstein. Yeah, right. So they did a famous concert where they had like Nazi boots on, right? And for some people that was like, oh, they're perpetuating the meme. But for some other people, like, no, they're separating it from its horizon of meaning. They're setting it free. And to the people who think it's definitely a Nazi thing, they're like, you're the people who are locking it into the Nazi horizon of meaning.
Wait, so do you mean like boots with a swastika on it?
Yeah, like they wore just a couple of standard Nazi props. They had the boots, they had some swastikas, they had some little shoulder
Whoa, holy shit.
Right? Right, and they did it in Germany, so that was extra provocative.
What,
but like, is that the argument is, are they perpetuating the meme or are they liberating it from its normal affect?
Well, I mean, what did you think about that?
I don't know. I kind of leaned towards liberating. Like I didn't see, I looked at it and I didn't feel like it was like my first association is anxious. But when I look past I think, no,
totally. I'm like,
this is liberating.
I'm like, Layman, are you okay right now?
I think really. I think it is important to separate the forms of the memes from their normal associations, because it's like in some ways the problems are the automatic linkings of memes to other memes or affects.
Well, what is there something about like, all right, I think you're wrong there, so I'm going to challenge you there. But yeah. I mean, this is the fight we're in. But like, what do you? I mean, what was it about the style of Rammstein that suggested to you that because there's a style, right? Because that's the content you're talking about. The content was like,
right. I'm talking about them. They're
instantly anxious.
They're remixing a certain type of content. So already I know they're coming at it from a context which isn't necessarily bound to a content, but is remixing that content. So
like that's what they do.
Yeah, well, they're not. It's not like they do this in everything, and I've seen them do other things, and I know they kind of remix it. And I'm looking at the people in the audience, and to me, the people they're moving with free movements and rhythms, which to me is the opposite of the fascist, where people become more locked down and mechanical and reactive. People are being opened and made more fluid by this.
Well, I actually have a different. I mean, man, I'm not gonna. Okay, so I used to be a metalhead, right? Just to let people know, that was like my first thing. Yeah. But I find it troublesome in the sense of like, I mean, there's something about metal and its flavor, combined with the iconography, is like, metal has this very up and down quality. It's like it's very like it's not modularly side to side. Does that make sense? It doesn't move swaying from side to side.
It doesn't undulate. Yeah,
it doesn't undulate. So there's a little, for me, undulation and versus that linearity. That linearity is very, very prototypical to white supremacist culture or white culture. Sure. And white supremacist culture. The marching. Yeah. And that's like actually one of my first studies is around how the spine and how the hara and the pelvis and the dantians move depending on the society's ideological orientation is actually like where I really started my work. So for me, I'm a little bit like, I don't know. The sway is very.
It's hard to tell. I'm not trying to make. I don't even like Rammstein, and I'm certainly not trying to make they're a higher level metal band or something like that. I brought it up as a site where I've heard people disagree over separating memes from affects.
right. Because for me, actually, that would. I guess I don't know, but again, I'm in my own triggers and projections right now, right? So that's like the real deal. Are we able to pull up the footage of that? Is that something we can do?
Maybe. All right, Bruce, if you're watching.
But it was like a big thing.
Yeah, it was like a provocative cultural event at the time.
Oh, right. But yeah, there's also an aspect of metal culture that is like become the devil, right?
Yeah, for sure. And that's,
right. Okay,
that can
that's
go
what I'm
either
getting.
way, right? Like, because you do have to own the shadow, but at the same time, you don't want to practice being the opposite of what you actually value.
Right. Well, I think this is where a lot of, okay, I'm gonna get in a lot of trouble here, but like, this is where people fucking hate me. And it's gonna be really real. Have people noticed that red, white, and black are both fascist and anti-fascist movements? That's the aesthetic is actually somewhat close to each other because they developed at the same time from the same place.
Sure.
And something that people don't talk about, and this is I think really important, is like any given day, I'll take anti-fascism over fascism. Like if you had to, like, who do you like to have over for dinner? That's not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
What I'm saying though is that the nervous level effect of the aesthetic, if they look the same, is going to be the same.
Yes.
And this is something. So that's what I'm saying. I think Rammstein's caught in a little bit of that too. Sure. Is like. Yeah. Maybe like I like metal or I liked metals. I'm not trying to like fucking toss a whole. It's just an awareness, right?
Yeah.
There's
also different grades of the thing we're talking about. Like a lot of people are in a place where they're just trying to get a half an inch above being totally defined by a thing, and you're like, that's good, that's great. Now, ideally, you'd want to get like 10 feet above that thing,
right?
But you are making the right move. You're recontextualizing. You're trying to open it a little. It's a beginning. It's certainly not enough, but in general, yeah, do things like that.
What do you mean recontextualizing? Or
I mean, like you're gonna be like, hey, these are Nazi boots, right? So then I've like added a thing. I've added a layer of distance. I've stepped out of it a little bit, and that's better than just these are the boots we wear.
Oh, right.
So that's not the level I think people need to be, but it's the right kind of move. You got to try to get some distance.
Well, it's like I guess you can call it a step. I think it's just interesting to consider when you're talking about aesthetics and the impact on the nervous system, and then when you have like let's say let's make it simple. If Rammstein was being anti-Nazi, they're doing it in a way that looked really close to pro-Nazi. So it's like hard to tell. And I think we should be. It's. I don't really. Let's go to the fascination side of like that because. Yeah, I mean, I think we're in a very gunky part, but it is really interesting because I definitely see that with things like. I've seen that with anti-fascist movements, fascist movements, and going like, oh, the aesthetic seems very similar. Like there's crossover. And what it does to your nervous system, like a heightened sense, like the black, white, red gives you this heightened, like, whoa, like shock and sense, and then needing to band together to manage that kind of feeling is very prominent in both sides of that polarity. And it's like, and I think the part of memeroticness is like mimetic competency is about understanding things like that. Does that make sense? And going like, oh, is this thing that we like? Yeah.
There's a lot of. I mean, there's different aspects to the mimetic erotics thing. Like one is like, hey, we're going to bring opposites and we're going to put them together. Mm-hmm. But another one is like, hey, these things that appear to be opposites, they're pretty similar. They're already very together.
Yeah. So that's the thing where things look opposed to each other, but they're actually the same God.
Yeah.
On a nervous system level. And this is
that's
probably
kind of how I define philosophy. Like I would call a philosophy like a distinction worker is the way that a prostitute's a sex worker, but like their job is to kind of like ask where we have one concept, is there actually a bunch of differences that we're concealing? But where we have some differences, are we actually hiding the fact of a similarity? Like to what degree do our categories map reality or obscure reality, I guess? Where were we going to go with that?
Oh, can you go back to, did you say philosopher and extinction worker?
Distinction.
Oh, okay. And then
But
you said
an
prostitute and
extinction
sex.
worker would be awesome. Yeah. Like,
Oh, okay.
yeah, in the sense
Okay.
that we call prostitutes sex workers now in the more civilized countries. I think we might
Mm.
want to call philosophers distinction workers. But as for these extinction
Mm.
workers, that intrigues me.
Oh, right. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Moving on from that.
Maybe the Buddha was an
Yeah.
extinction worker.
Yeah, the Buddha is definitely an extinction worker. So there's a few things that happen. I guess I just wanted to, just I don't know. It's probably a little bit leftover SJW culture thing. I just wanted to, check in about, like, I guess it's my own community of people, so we're not using prostitute as, like, because I think people use that in a pejorative way. So I just wanted to make sure that
Yeah,
that's
sure.
not what we're doing. So, but just wanted to clear the air for people listening and stuff.
Anybody who's listening, I don't think we're using anything in a pejorative way. Let's pretend we've cleaned all of the words already.
Right. I actually kind of like that. No, I actually like that attitude actually a little bit. Well, let's see who can play. All right. Yeah, so the other layers are so what's coming to me, yeah, there's like mimetic layers. This is, I call intra-mimetic competition. So when you say like there's belief survivors, there's like the more grounded version and then there's like the more heightened activated version.
Mhm.
And so the different levels in which a meme hits the nervous system all also operate on the same plane. So all the memes that like come from a reactive place all love each other. They're in opposition to each other a lot of the time, but they actually co-create each other too, each other's realities, and construct them. And the tendency is that the more grounded the memes are, they'll tend to actually congeal and work together as well. So this is also something. The name of the meme, it's like there's different dimensionalities of memes and how they rest in the body and how we feel them. And this is something that I think, and being able to, again, so there's this mimetic microcosmic orbit where we're able to travel the height of our nervous system well, and this is also a thing. So when we get into nervous system meme, I think the mapping starts to get very complex in what we can do with things, right? And I think for me, the practice of memerotics, or whatever you want to call it, is like more competence, because in a culture where eroticism and sex is kind of like don't have a lot of competence around, connecting to those two competences of memetics and eroticism, I think is really essential, really, really highly essential, especially in an age where information is becoming more and more abstract and more alive at the same time. And really wake up to, it's like, oh no, this is really happening, y'all. This is really fucking happening. Like, artificial intelligence is already here because everything is alive anyway. So, like, the internet is alive. It's a meme. Like, the mimetic complex, it definitely wants to keep living. And I think that's something that, I don't know. I haven't been so much of a futurist, but I find myself moving towards. Yeah. And in some ways I'm
Seems
plugged
like a
into.
natural extension of animism.
Yeah, yeah. What do you like? Yeah, mimetics and animism to me are like, or especially when you get to mimetic somatic, then that animism is like kind of, I feel like, a way we can anthropologically study how memes have been worked with in the past, and integrate that into like a contemporary kind of practice, which is by nature like very spiritual as a practice. It's unavoidably so, and very contemplative as well.
Yeah, I think one of the
Yeah.
things that comes up in developmentalist communities is, you kind of want to make sure you're using a higher version rather than a lower version of something. It's a little bit like intramimetic, like what's the intramimetics of animism is there, like they can be a very low version of that, which to me, low animism is like trying to put a dish in the dish rack and it doesn't fit, and all of a sudden it's an entity that's thwarting me.
Right, right,
Right, and I'm gonna like use extra force to punish this fucking dish rack.
right.
But then on the other hand, there's this infusion of pattern and mind and intelligence into the forms of the world, and this way of relating to them that gives them credit as if they're active co-participants with me, and I want to call that animism too.
Right. So I would say I challenge you. That's like kind of probably where we can do a little battling, because it's probably like what you call high animism is just healthy upper dantian animism. but there's also like dick, pussy, anus, genital hara animism. That's a low animism. It's like the base. And that's what I mean is like the funk. It's like the
Well,
body part, if that makes sense.
I
It's
guess
not
what
the
I would probably
contemplative.
argue, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, what I would probably argue is the higher is the greater blending of the different centers, right? So that even when they're like, hey, this is lower Dantian, they're like, yeah, but we can say that and recognize that, right? So it's lower Dantian infused with more upper Dantian than it might normally be the case. It's a higher level of blending among the systems.
Interesting. Well, yeah, I mean, we can play with the results of that, but I think you're wrong. I just put it to that way. And maybe that's like a place where we can leave off because that's actually kind of
Okay.
funny.
Yeah, I mean, we've been at this for a while. Let's absolutely do some more because this is fun, and we can take these.
Or actually, no. Okay, let's extend it. Let's
All
extend it
right,
five,
let's we can
five
do a
minutes.
few more.
Okay,
Yeah,
fuck
yeah.
it. I think the reason why I'm saying that is okay. I'm gonna call you out. How's that?
Yeah,
Let's
go.
do it. Yeah, I think this is interesting. It's like a meeting of tribes too, right? It's saying I think the contemplative, playful nature still needs to be connected to grounded, local, and this is a very big question, very big question of how humanity has developed mimetically. Like I said at the beginning of this conversation, we just talked about the heaven, which was kind of the mainland people, and the earth, which was like the indigenous Japanese people. And there's this weird thing around, so the higher the meme sits in the body, it's more tends to be more universal,
Yeah.
and the lower is local. This is kind of like a really simple thing, like, and how this reflects is like a culture that identifies with the mountain in front of them, does not seek other mountains necessarily, right? And this is very simplified because obviously tribalism led to colonialism, so there's obviously a link. So I'm not saying that doesn't exist. And on the other hand, groups that worship the sun, like even the Japanese, tend towards empire, things in the sky. So once you can identify with what's in the sky, you can dominate everything, or you have domain over everything, right? And these two polarities have been really something that's been playing out in human history and navigating with each other. And there's some kind of fluid harmonic balance of things that I don't think the high being high and that infused and sensual is bad. It's like that sensual upper dungeon is very important. But the eroticism, right, fused into the upper dantian. But there's also needs to be a lot of going in the other direction,
Yeah.
because it's like I think we're moving towards an age where there's a real we're reaching such a logical conclusion of our evolution as a cultural species in this kind of globalized world where we're all super connected, and then there's tribalism really has emerged, right, on the internet, even though we're super connected, but this tribalism. So there's this blending out of universality and locality that have to be harmonized with each other.
Yeah.
And that's something I'm really interested in. That's why I'm talking about the memerotic culture that is like this on the spectrum of activity, can be fighting and fucking and the playfulness, because you do need ways between different tribal groups. It's a function of humanity to actually have that tribalism, for those tribes to be able to interact with each other, but there has to be a universal system.
Yeah. Yeah.
There has to be a universal culture to hold the other subcultures in a good way. And I think there's something about where humans are, it's like we're really synthesizing our past right now in this very axial age, kind of very unique way, that, and we're right in the middle of it. And And so because of this, I even like, whoa, that was a car. Like even my relationship to colonialism has been changing because the more I study, kind of, somewhat anthropologically, the early animist cultures, you can see how it led to colonialism, even just because of the tribal warfare. And then you're like, oh well, I want more safety, more safety. I'm going to create an alliance, and then you're just like, a human biological organism is oriented towards more intensity and more safety. So it's like just programmed with the nascent thing. And I think we're in an age though where I hope the political conversation is really good for this around colonialism. But the other aspect we, I think, need to look at is there's this natural tendency of our culture to move towards this kind of universal connective thing, and there's a lot of shit that happens when you do that, and we're still dealing with it. And there's something about this moment as we are in right now, trying to harmonize that universality in the locality. And that to me is a relationship between the upper and lower dantian in the body, literally. And it's actually, yeah. And hold on, and it's actually even a little bit beyond what I think, beyond what we might have considered things like democracy. Because it's going to be political concepts that are even actually divorced even from things like democracy as we know it. It's going to, like what we're trying to mutate into is not, it has to integrate every other stage that came before it, or structure, right? They're left open, but they're integrated into something that is like, that's kind of how I'm starting to see things. And that is the Taiji pole connecting heaven and earth. And, we're the evolutionary conclusion for the moment. And I think this is the hairy part. I don't think we are. And that's kind of like the nasty part of the internet, right? But we're the only species on earth that can connect our lower and upper dantian in a straight line. The only one. That's interesting. Memetically evolutionary. And so I think there is something really important happening right now, and probably that important experiment is going to get kiboshed by something even more important, probably. And that's the reality of humans, is that we're probably going to be like, oops. I don't know what that's going to mean. It could be like cyborgs going like, ah. But like, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, I know I'm a little bit heavy in the effort dantian right now, so I'm trying to ground, because I think I just made an argument that makes humanity the epic peak of like civilization. In evolution, you don't
want to go too hard into that.
I don't want to go too hard on that. I don't want to go too Rammstein on that.
There's something about that I relate to, and in fact,
there's a flavor of it, right? It's an interesting story.
I like I agree with sort of what needs to happen and what is going to happen and how we have to be. Yeah. For me, the map of what things look like that I draw those conclusions out of is maybe a little messier. Right?
Yes.
So
Absolutely.
The dantians have to blend with each other. That means the top one's in the bottom one, the bottom's in the top one, the bottom one's in the middle one's in the bottom one, right? So they're all going to cross-pollinate each other, whether we do like heart, mind, and body, or we do 7 chakras, or we do 12 intelligence, or whatever. They've all got to cross-pollinate.
Yes.
But for me, like, I'm like, most spines are horizontal, and I take that really seriously. Like, even as humans, half the day we're lying down.
I like it.
When I say
now you're fucking with me. All right,
right.
So this is good. This is a good battle.
I don't think those are.
Now you got it.
Like, because some people will talk about the levels as if they're the stages of development. I'm like, no. At every stage, you have all of these systems. So it's kind of weird to call one higher or lower, because usually they're horizontal in organisms. And
I love it. I'm getting smoked. I just got smoked by Layman. I just saw you. You totally smoked me.
In the kind of standard thing in the integral community is that higher and deeper is the same thing, right? This was like a word, because the Romans used the same word, altus, to mean just how much of this you have. So we often be like higher or deeper, higher and or deeper, or whatever we mean, like whatever that is, more of that.
I think you should just stop talking, because you alreay won.
All right.
You should just shut the No, you can keep talking. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Recording right here.
No, keep going. No, but I'm just gonna say, the moment you said humans are mostly not horizontal, I think I lost. Just so you know, you can please keep going.
You
I'm
had me at
listening.
horizontal.
No, because that totally undermined my premise, which I was getting caught in, is like human beings are erect, which is extremely hyper masculine view of the self,
Yeah.
right? And you're like kind of like, no, human beings are mostly in life like not horizontal. I mean, sorry, not vertical. They're horizontal, and that's like a more vaginal kind of receptive state, open state, and they're both fine, but
Yeah.
just how I was constructing that in my mind really showed me I can feel the sensation in my body of like you saved me there. Actually, you saved me, Layman. Because the logical conclusion of that, where I was going, I was like, what the I was like, is this really what I want to think? It's a great science fiction. I don't want to believe this is what we're doing. I don't want to believe that we're at the apex of evolution or anything. But I'm down with like the most chill. I mean, yeah, I'm very interested in how that the Daichan's being horizontal. That's very good. That's very good. That's very, very good. I had to say. I don't know why. You know what I mean? Do you get it? Do you know what I'm saying? Like you cut my legs there, and I think it's really good. I think I lost that one. Cuddle? Do you know what I mean? Like
We're back. We're back. We're gonna cuddle a little bit after what's happened here.
so I think we needed a post-coital moment.
Yeah, I think so too.
Okay, because I was like, Layman, what the fuck?
Yeah. Let's just lie here and murmur with each other.
Yeah, I really actually appreciated the podcast. I love being humiliated on camera. But yeah, I thought that was. I just told you to shut the fuck up because I was already on the floor in my Danchan's horizontal. You're like, why are you stepping on me still? Yeah, brother. It's nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Anything you'd say?
I agree, and it's like we were saying earlier with style and content. Like it's not the phrase "shut the fuck up"; it's how you say it. It's a very acceptable way to say it, man.
Okay, so like I'll be honest that when Layman cut it off, I was like, oh, did I piss off Layman because I was just having fun here, you know? Because I was like, no, I'm done. I fucking. But yeah, I mean, I guess I feel like there was like a really nice example of the kind of culture I think of exchange that I really want to have with people, and I might have to take another shot at you because that fucking sucked.
Well, I think
I got so rude.
I think we're appreciating a lot of the same things,
Okay.
and I'm having fun with you.
Okay.
And like we're obviously able to go into a lot of similar territories of discussion together. So yeah, let's do some more of it. And we're obviously able to sort of do it in a way that's like half getting along and half a little bit confrontational. And so that's fun too.
Was you think it was confrontational a little bit?
Not necessarily, but I feel like we didn't like. I think a lot of people in other podcasts might have excluded, the element of challenge. Hey, I'm going to call you out, or these sorts of things. Which right, they're not problematic, but I think there are people who would find them problematic, and I think both of us don't.
Yeah, I think it was more honest. It was there's a sussing out of whether it's okay or not to do that, and also I mean, how do you feel about your W?
Good.
Yeah.
I think we're feeling out that it is okay, right? Like we can go in all those places.
Right. Yeah, and I think my larger project is about like if you can have exchanges like that with people, it dissolves a lot of the stress of when different tribes meet and you don't feel safe with each other and you're trying to pretend that you are and doing all the mammalian things. Like now we're doing the mammalian mirroring thing, right?
right there. But I think that's the role of shamans, right? Is that they have to be able to play in these different registers and like understand the serious things at those bridging points between communities, but also open that up, also be clowns, also be like, hey, these things are real, but not as serious as we thought. Let's create an easy space where these tribes might be able to come together.
Oh yeah, the clowning is essential. Yeah. I would dare you to have Dare on.
Okay.
Do you know Dare?
I don't know him personally, but I've heard some good things. I know a little bit of his work.
Yeah. So they're a handful. So I
Yeah.
mean, I've been talking with them about battling on the stuff and clowning.
If you reach out to them and suggest it, I'll reach out as well, and we can get something going.
All right, maybe.
Okay, maybe.
No, maybe. I mean, maybe you should do it. Maybe like you get. I mean,
well, I mean, I'm happy to, but I just think like if there's another voice saying the same thing, it usually is more likely to happen.
Oh, okay, yeah. They've been pretty. Yeah, let me think about it. We'll figure it out.
Think about it. Yeah.
But I think they might be. Yeah, I mean, I rarely lose, man. So this was fun. Thank you so much. Blessings.
Yeah, blessings. Great to get to know you. And anytime you want me on your thing, I'm very happy because I want this conversation to go forward.
Okay, lovely.
Right. Cheers, man.
Okay, blessings.